Good evening, everyone. I'm Nick Reveles, many years associated with San Diego Opera, now happily retired, kind of. And delighted to welcome you to SummerFest tonight in this interview. And our guest tonight is the composer, Marc Neikrug. Let's welcome him. Now, because the piece we're experiencing tonight is an opera, and I'm an opera guy, and you're already telling me, no, maybe it's not an opera. We'll get into that. And because we've only got 30 minutes together, I really want to talk about opera in your life, early on, how it affected you, first operas, exposure, that kind of thing. And just to give you a little quick background, Marc is the son of two cellists, and one of them, your mother, was also a composer. Music was part of your life from the day you were born, I'm sure. No?
About 9 months before.
9 months before.
Think about the cello.
Oh, yes, of course, of course. So I'm wondering, I mean, I'm sure, obviously there was music in the home. Was there opera in the home? What was your first exposure to opera? What do you remember?
I know that my mother wrote an opera, and I know that, it's funny because I haven't thought about this, but I know there was a lot of contentiousness about the person that wrote the libretto, because I think the person that wrote the libretto also happened to be the person that had the money to make the opera happen.
Oh.
And I think there were large issues that weren't ever resolved. So, I mean, I knew that as a child.
So you knew that opera was dramatic from inside, not just on stage.
I did. My real opera learning was when I was in my late teens. I lived about 3 blocks from the Scala. And because of all the people that I knew through my parents, I knew a lot of the conductors that would come, and I would go meet them. I'd find out when the first piano rehearsal was. I'd meet them at the stage door and say, can I spend the next 5 weeks with you? And they liked that because that's mostly how they learned opera.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a very old process.
Yes, indeed.
So I spent those 5-week periods over the years with several obviously great conductors from beginning to end, because I didn't know how that worked. You know, how does this happen? You get these people flying in from all over the place, and 5 weeks later there's this huge production. So I did go through that a lot.
Yeah. Did you play your share of piano reductions?
I played many tedious,
Aren't they
torturous.
Awful? Aren't they awful?
They're awful.
Who wrote the piano reductions of
No
Rossini
pianist.
operas?
Yeah, not a pianist.
No. Thank you so much. You have to fake so much to make it sound anywhere like, I'm sorry, I'm getting on into the weeds here, but it really is awful.
Yeah.
No pianist ever wrote a piano reduction of an opera. Thank you so much. What are your top 3 operas? What operas do you really love and you can't live without?
I love Tosca. I love, all the Mozart operas. And I love Wozzeck, particularly.
Thank you. Wozzeck is in my top 3.
Yeah.
I was introduced to it when I was 15 years old, the Boulez recording, which was extraordinary, and I think a first in a way, at least for a stereo recording, just wonderful. And then I would turn up the scream in Act 3 to drive my parents crazy. Love that. Now, was Los Alamos your first opera?
Was my first 2.
Your first 2?
Yeah, the first and the last.
Oh. we're getting to the piece that we're seeing. I'm going to call it a piece. I'm not going to call it an opera
That's better.
anymore. And what first drew you to write Los Alamos?
Oh my gosh.
And this was 1988, is that right?
That was the premiere. I started in '83. You said a half hour?
Yeah, I'm watching the time.
Okay.
We're good.
The quick version is I showed a film of a theater piece I had written to the head of the Berlin Opera, Götz Friedrich, at that time. And he said, whatever you want to do next, we'll do it. And at that time, I was in touch with a lot of doctors who were part of this group called Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Yeah.
And at that time, there were huge demonstrations against nuclear weapons. And these doctors had said things like, everyone must do whatever they can against nuclear weapons in their own field. So I thought, well, that's easy. I'll call Pincus, we'll play a concert and give them the money. And then I realized that writing an opera on whatever subject I want means I'll have thousands of people that have paid a lot of money to sit and listen to whatever I want to say to them. And that drew me to the idea of an anti-nuclear opera, which drew me to a long process and ended up with a new home, a wife, a big family, and lots of changes.
Wow.
However, the actual producing of that, where I was in control of, yes, the music, except for a guy who was doing this, and yes, in charge of what was being said, except for the guy who was in charge of telling people how to say it, and many other aspects which were so out of my control.
Yeah.
And it became a 5-week nightmare.
Well, opera is a collaborative art, and it can be wonderful.
Can be.
And yes, yeah, exactly. And it can be awful.
Well, it depends on who it depends on the hierarchy of the collaborative. I was 30-something. So, I was, yes, of course, whatever you want. And I hated it. Therefore, the last.
This is, it's funny because my next question was, maybe it's the one thing in composing an opera that you'll never do again. It's right here in black and white. What did you learn from the writing of Los Alamos that you'll never do again? And write another opera?
Well, no, because at the same time, I remember when the commission was being negotiated. And again, I knew nothing about, what number, what do I ask for, what's appropriate. And I asked a person who was in a big publishing house, and he said, Mark, I'll tell you something interesting. Luciano Berio, who you probably heard a couple of nights ago,
so wonderful,
was writing an opera that very same time for the Salzburg Festival, and he was being paid practically, if not exactly, zero. However, he had a contract, this is what the publisher in his words said, in his contract, they cannot change a light bulb without his permission.
Smart man.
Smart man. So yes, I would do another one under those conditions, including the light bulbs.
So another aspect of all this is that you wrote that libretto.
Yeah,
and
I did.
And you wrote the libretto, if we can call it that, for Through Roses, which is a piece from 1980. It's a theater piece for spoken word and instrumentalists, and you wrote the libretto for tonight's piece. What is the advantage of writing the words as well as composing the music for you?
Advantage is the wrong word. It's for me, imperative. And the reason for that is when I did the first one, the Through Roses, I knew the subject. I knew what I wanted to write about. The more I looked for a text, and the more I thought about it, and the more I would find something and say, yeah, this is really great except for that part. And then you realize, okay, I don't want that. It becomes more and more focused. And at a certain point, I went to a very good friend of mine, a great actor, and I said, I can't find the text for this. And he said, well, you have to write it. And he was right, because at the point where you are so clear about what the text needs to do, you'll never find it. I mean, it maybe, but it would be very unlikely. So in doing it myself, the process is not like two people. I mean, it's not like a librettist or a writer and a composer who somehow do what they do and try and come together. I'm already there. It's me. And the advantages are I discard immediately anything that I know I can't put the music to. So the time advantage is gigantic.
Yeah.
You know, I won't write those words if I don't think I can do it. And the second thing is it miraculously eliminates the possibility of those conflicts, because the librettist is not going to say, well, you know, I need to hear the words here. Why are you writing such loud music? Because the composer is going to say, fine, you know, you're the guy, do it. And the other way around. You know, if the composer says, I don't care if you understand these words, the music is what matters here, the librettist is not going to say, you know, it's all right there.
I love that answer. I guess I'm also wondering, as you're writing the words, are you musicalizing
Yes.
in your head at the same time and making sure that this is something that can be sung, number one, but and can communicate what it is that you're trying to communicate?
It's more vague than that.
Yeah.
In other words, I know writing these words or this scene, let's say, the words are a little bit more detailed, but let's say just this. This is what has to happen between here and here. I know I can set that music. I have a pretty good idea of how I will go about it. It's not playing for me. Though, you know, the idea that any composer, especially Beethoven, took a walk in the woods and some symphony came, no.
Yeah, no.
No. They don't make birds like that. So, you know, you get a sense. You get a sense of it's more about the emotional content. You know, it's all about the emotional content.
Yeah.
All of it. The structure of the drama is for them. It's, you know, where are you after 3 minutes? Where do I want you to be after 5 minutes? And it's driving the audience through an experience.
Do you finish the text completely before you set it to music, or is it
Again, vaguely?
a bit of both?
You know, I'll fix words, I'll fix sentences, I'll take things out if they don't fit, but pretty much I finish that first, and when that's done, I know I can do it.
Well, then let's talk about the inception of a song by Mahler,
Okay.
which you will call a piece rather than an opera.
Let me explain that a little.
Yes.
The things that always bothered me about opera, and I love opera, I mean, I truly love it, but as a student, when you're studying and you start to write for voice, the very first lesson, and this is anyone, they say to you, this is how the timing works. Any sentence that you can speak if you sing it, it takes 3 times as long. That's the rule. And it is exactly that. So, what does that do for reality in drama? Everything is stretched. That's why you have such problems with singers in terms of acting, because it's too much time. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't like that. The second thing I don't like is what everybody doesn't like. I can't understand what they're singing. And I speak all the languages. So the way I always imagined getting around that was what I did in that first piece in 1980 in Through Roses. I wanted a drama, spoken, that took place in real time, but with music that was as important emotionally as in an opera. So I devised my own way in that piece of having cues for larger sections. So the actor knew, he would hear something here, and he would hear something there, and in between he had a certain section to act. Not speak, but act as in a drama. That worked really well. I wrote a second one, which is my favorite, really, called Death Row Memoirs of an Extraterrestrial. It's a comedy. And that worked. But then I had an experience. There was the most significant director of opera, period, was a man named Walter Felsenstein, who was the director of the East Berlin Opera for decades, while it was communist, and he was a dictator. He could rehearse 200 times and cancel on the day of the performance. He had that kind of power. For some reason which I've never understood, he appeared at Stony Brook to give a lecture while I was there, and that makes no sense to me. I don't know how that happened. But he was there, and he had singers and a pianist, and they started a workshop. And at a certain point, he stopped and looked at the singers, and he said, "Why are you singing?" And they were just blank. They had no idea what he was talking about. And they said, "Well, because it's," and he said, "No." He said, "Why are you singing?" And they couldn't answer, and he said, which I'll never forget, this is a long time ago, "You sing when you reach an emotional level where speaking no longer suffices." And that intrigues me. So in the piece tonight, I've tried to use both. I use speaking and acting. I use singing. And I try and make transitions which follow the emotional. It's a little bit of an experiment. It's a big experiment. But I did one little thing, which you might notice, which is really just seeing, what would happen if, and that is I tried to do the switch in one word. So there's a time where the female is talking about something, and she's very afraid of what's happening to me, and then she says the word afraid, but the ah is spoken and the afraid is sung. I'm And to me, and I've seen this in Portland, obviously, the most satisfaction to me, the thing I'm most happy about and proud about is this is a drama. It's actors speaking and acting, and then they sing, and then they speak and act, and then they sing, but it feels completely natural. You don't know, it just feels like, of course, that's what it should be. But there isn't anything quite like that.
No.
So I'm very happy about that part. But I can't stand singing mundane banal sentences.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, open the door.
Welcome.
Why is the door not? Why?
Yeah,
It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
and it takes too long.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Well, going back to Rossini,
yeah,
maybe some of those recitatives should have been
right.
sliced a little
Then the other thing that I'm having a problem with is no one really knows what to call this. I don't. It's not. I don't think it's an opera. I don't think. I mean, chamber. You say chamber opera. That means it's fewer people, but it doesn't really define what this is. I know what I call it.
What do you call it?
I call it music theater.
Huh.
But then people think it's a musical, which it's not.
No, I get that, and I'm hearing actually in opera circles even describing standard repertoire as music theater, which the best of them are.
Absolutely.
The Da Ponte and Mozart operas, for
Yeah.
instance, are absolutely that.
Yeah.
It's very economic writing. I mean, for the time, they had to have recitative, but those emotional moments that you're talking about are so special because they're treated so naturally,
Right.
so humanly.
Right.
And this is a very human story. This is, if you haven't heard about it, the story we're dealing with tonight is about a singer, a female singer, who has early onset Alzheimer's, and her husband is her pianist, and it's how the two of them deal with this, the deterioration of her mind and her body, and how they get through that. What are the origins of the story? What was the inception?
Yeah, again, it's the Beethoven in the Forest syndrome. For me, and I'm assuming most composers, there aren't those moments where you wake up and say, I need to write an opera about Alzheimer's. It's more strands. So, one strand is I've always been very fascinated and very involved with the neuroscientists who are studying music in the brain, because everything about music and the brain is fascinating to me. Music travels through different pathways. We are now using it to treat Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and these things because particularly if stroke victims lose speech, they're now able to teach them how to sing. They can't speak, but they can sing. So that's always fascinated me. I've also always been in love with Mahler. I mean,
Who isn't?
forever.
Who
Yeah.
isn't?
I don't know, leave the
Is
room.
anybody in this room not in love with Mahler? Come on. Oh, we'll talk.
And for all the years that I played violin recitals with Pinchas, many, at some point I found a little encore, which we then started playing at the end. Like when we wanted, that's enough, we want to go eat now, we would play that. And it got to be known, maybe it wasn't, maybe I imagined it, but it was sort of known that, when that's there, there's not going to be another one. And at some point, the music theater part, the going between singing and speaking part, the music in the brain, the Alzheimer's, the last encore, all of these things, for whatever reason, came together at a certain moment, and I thought, why not try and do this? And then the song, which is very important, was the message. The song I picked to be her last encore.
Mahler's song.
Mahler's song was the message, which really ties everything together, and I like that a lot. And then it became really the journey of overcoming the problems.
Yeah.
You know, how do I do this? How do I present the song? How do I make the audience know what the song is?
And do you use the song?
Oh, I
or
use it.
melodic?
I use it. But that became difficult too, because how do I get in and out of it?
Yeah.
You know, you can't.
This is a very different style.
Very different style, and so I had to find ways to transition. You know, from pure me to half Mahler, into Mahler, out of Mahler.
And now normally composers are trying to chase the other composers out of the room. But
Well,
in
yeah.
this piece, Mahler is integral to the story.
Right. Right.
And provides, I imagine, an emotional
It
wallop at
helps.
certain times. Yeah.
Helps.
Yeah. I can't wait to see this
Whatever
piece,
it is.
whatever it is. I was also fascinated by the rehearsal process. I wanted to ask you because we've got 4 minutes left, but I did want to ask you: did you workshop it with singers?
No.
You just presented it to them and then went into rehearsal.
Yeah, I don't workshop.
You're brave.
No, I'm accomplished.
Bravo.
I was brave 30 years ago.
So you presented this. What was the rehearsal process like?
It
Was it these two singers, Kelly
Yeah.
and Jennifer?
It was them. It was very interesting because in my other pieces, they were for actors. And actors know how to act. They can't sing, but they know how to act. Here, I needed really singing actors.
Yeah.
And the production of singing is very different from the production of speaking. And they had to get comfortable with being able to project the way a great actor can project. They know that. But a singer doesn't usually do that on the stage. So they had to become comfortable with that. And it's not stifled speaking. You know, it's very free. So they had to become comfortable with speaking, listening to the music, fitting. The biggest, what should we call it, confrontational moment in all of this. There was a certain moment where they begged me to conduct the piece. Because, then they can be like on this opera stage and just watch and go with that. And I said, no, it cannot be, because it's chamber music. This is a quartet and a clarinet and two voices, and you need to listen to each other. You need to integrate. You need to know where you are. And there can't be another force standing there where everybody's just coming from there. It has to be that.
And you know what a challenge that is for opera singers who are used to having that very, very clear beat, watching on TV monitors backstage or even when they're on stage.
Right. But they're magnificent. And it's a great stretch for them. I mean, it's a wonderful thing for them to have, taken on the challenge and been able to embrace it and absorb.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us and with the audience. I am so looking forward to this composition of yours, and best of everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.